I'm playful together. I'm playful. I'm prayful together. I'm prayful. And I'm forgiveful together. And I'm forgetful. And if you want to experience light in something, we've all been looking in the news. We see things we don't like, but the truth is that there's something that we can bring to bear in every situation, and it's that light. And that light, when we bring that light into the situations of life, as Paul wrote, that light touches those situations, and every situation becomes that light. And that light lifts everything up. And I know that it's moving past the appearances of things, isn't it? It's moving past the opposites of things. But it takes the attitude of playfulness, prayfulness, and forgiveness. And I want to talk about these, about how to energize our lives. I had a friend who was going through a pretty tough situation. How many of you know who Catherine Ponder is? Raise your hand. Catherine Ponder, you probably read her books. You may know that she was a Unity minister in San Antonio, Texas. But before that, she had a church in Birmingham, Alabama. And she didn't talk too much about that church because they drove her out. That was a tough situation in the early 1960s. Could you imagine driving out Catherine Ponder? Well, they didn't have a minister after that for the next 17 years. They had guest speakers every Sunday, but Unity headquarters wasn't going to send anybody there to, after they went through a few things, and they were too smart to do that. Well, I had one of my classmates, Jerry Bartholow, who was one of their guest speakers on a regular basis there, and he kind of fell in love with the congregation, and they fell in love with him, and it was really wonderful, and he knew there were problems in the church. He knew that the same little ornery group was still there, but he knew that he could meet the need, so he went to the people in the office at Unity headquarters, and he said, give me a shot at this. They want to hire me as their permanent minister. I'd love to do this. And they said, we don't think it's going to work out. He says, come on, just give me a chance. So they did, and they were kind of right, because it was really rough. It got so bad. There were subpoenas, and there was papers, things, and all kinds of stuff, and really bad stuff was going on. And the stress of it, the sense of injustice of it, he broke out in some kind of skin disease that they never could tell what the cause of it was. But when I saw him, he looked like, he'd been in a train wreck. And his board looked at him and they realized that they could do certain things, but he wasn't helping himself. So they said, you know what you need to do? They knew that he was a veteran golfer. He was a guy with a playful spirit, but he lost his golf game. They said, you go around the country for 6 months and do nothing but play golf. And do your prayer work and do your stuff, and we'll take care of this situation and clean it up for you, and then you can come home. So he took his playfulness. He had that attitude of a child. Remember what Jesus said? He said, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? They asked him, and he called the little child to his side, and he set that child in the middle of them all. He said, believe me, unless you turn yourself around and become like little children, you won't even be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. In fact, only those who make themselves as small as this child are as greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Well, what kind of things do children do? Well, they play. And he decided that he would take his time playing. Now, he also took his time praying. He was very clear about doing his forgiveness work, about doing his affirmations and his meditations. But he was driving around the country. He stayed with me. I was out in California for a couple of weeks. He took my sports car, drove it up to Yosemite, and he did something really interesting. Playfulness is a very interesting thing. It shows up in a lot of ways. And one place it shows up is in nature. Do you spend enough time in nature? Did you know a study came out this week that found that there's a direct correlation between how many birds you hear chirping and how well your psychology is working at any given time? In other words, the more bird chirps you hear, the happier you are, the less depressed you are, and the more psychologically sound you are. Do you listen to enough bird chirps? Or did the cicadas drown it out? Yeah. But cicadas can also be nurturing. How many people? Okay, we have a vote between pro and con cicadas. Okay, who's pro cicada? Who likes the cicadas? I like. Who doesn't like the cicada? Get those cicadas out here. It doesn't matter. You're stuck with it. So, listen to the sounds of nature. I lay out in my hammock. I do my spiritual work. I work on my talks. And I sit. And I listen to the sounds of nature. I smell. They found that the smell of nature, the actual bacteria that come up out of the dirt actually has as strong an effect as an antidepressant on people's moods. It's powerful stuff. So he went up to Yosemite, and he spent every week, at least twice a week, going to the great golfing places, golf courses of the country, Pebble Beach. He went to Silverado. He went to all these places out in California and had a ball. And you know what? It was the golfing cure, because by the time he was done, he doubled back, he was totally clear. And he went back to his church, and his church was totally clear, and he served there for the next 15 years. And he passed on a few years ago. He's quite a bit older than I am. But this guy had to do a little bit of playfulness. Now, I'm not saying that you need to go off for 6 months in golf, but what are you doing in your life to have a spirit of play in your life? Now, how many people in this room have a dog? Raise your hand. You're covered. Okay, so you've got your playfulness. How about kids? How many people either have a kid or access to a grandkid or a kid of some sort? Raise your hand. Okay, you're covered too. So now all you got to do is focus on that, to have that attitude of play, to enjoy your life. Remember last week I talked about my being a dog when I was living in Hawaii and how I didn't have a sense of play and I needed to really learn how to play. Remember Mother Teresa required all of her workers to spend an hour playing and an hour praying every day in order to do the work with her in Calcutta? Well, one of the things I learned, and I didn't talk about this, was how to boogie board, how to bodyboard. You know, one time I surfed. I wasn't very good at it, but what I found was if you got a bodyboard, it had an advantage. It had two advantages. One is it was a lot easier because you couldn't fall off of it. And the second is that you were right in the wave. And I really enjoyed that. And I learned some things. You know, you learn from nature. And I learned that it's like life. The wave is like life. When you're working on something, when we're dealing with something in life, we don't want to get ahead of the wave and we don't want to be behind the wave. You've got to ride the wave, but not push the water. I ride the wave, but I don't push the water. Together? I ride the wave, but I don't push the water. Now, how do you get ahead of the wave? That's pushing the water in a sense. You're trying so hard to make things happen. Do you ever do that? Try to make things happen. Try to figure it out. Try to think it through. You know, there's so many times in my life that I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I would ask in prayer, explain so I understand. It was like, you'll never understand it at the level of consciousness you're at. You have to move up to another level. You've got to lift up out of it. You've got to energize your life in order not to understand it intellectually, but to understand it spiritually. To be in that spiritual consciousness in your life that lifts you up into that place where maybe you never understand it exactly intellectually, but you have a sense of purposefulness in your life. That it's all here to bless you. It's all here to heal you. That you can look at the situation and say, this is here to bless me. This is here to heal me. I'm using this to uncover my soul. I'm using this to heal my soul. These are affirmations that you can use. Or you can look at that situation and you can say, you know, I have the opportunity in this situation. Thank you, God, for the opportunity that this situation is giving me. And having that playful attitude is so powerful. Not pushing the water, but going with the wave. Now, what about being behind the wave? What's that? That's that lethargy. That's that ain't it awful. That's that, I think I'm just going to go on the internet. You know? Why should I bother? But you know what? You've got to make a little bit of effort. I noticed with the bodyboard, you've got to do some paddling, but then you catch the wave and you let the wave move with you. I don't know if this analogy helps you or not, but spiritually speaking, it's so important for us to be willing to do our part, to take our responsibility, and have that playful attitude towards life. What about that prayerful attitude towards life? You know, my friend, he cleared himself up, not just playing, but also doing his affirmations, his meditation every day, and renewing himself. But, you know, sometimes you've really got to energize yourself. You've got to get that energy going and lift yourself up. And it's not pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, but it's doing the things you need to do to charge your own internal batteries. I charge my own internal batteries. Together? I charge my own internal batteries. How do you do that? Well, you do your visualization, you do your meditation. This is kind of a troubling story, but a friend of mine in the Youth of Unity when I was a teenager had a psychotic break, and she started hearing voices telling her to kill herself because of her involvement with drugs, and she was she didn't tell anybody about this, but she was ready to commit suicide. And I asked her one day, I said, what's wrong? You seem different. And she finally opened up, and I was the one person that she told this to. And she picked the right person, because I took her to a church that had something like our chaplains. She went into prayer afterwards and actually had a healing. And the voices went away, and she felt much better, but life kind of caught up with her. You know how that goes. And she kind of found herself falling back into the same mindset. And sure enough, it started in again. But this time, she knew. She came to me, she said, it's happening again. And what came to me, I asked in prayer, was that she needed to do something on a daily basis to charge her battery. So although I did take her to the church, and afterwards they had the prayer time and the healing and all that, and it did get better, I also took her to a place where she learned how to meditate. Now, I didn't see this young woman for 40 years, but I ran into her about 4 or 5 years ago, and when I went to a conference in her town, and I just kind of stayed in peripheral touch with her. And when I saw her, she says, I just want to thank you, because you gave me the greatest gift anybody has ever given me in my life. And I thought maybe she was talking about, that she didn't commit suicide. She said, no, I learned how to meditate, and I haven't missed a day since. It's something that's a part of my life, and it's been the most important thing in my life. Now, when I knew her, when she was younger, she thought the world was awful, and she was never going to bring children into this terrible world. But she had this attitude where she raised 3 wonderful children, had a fantastic career as a doctor, and went on to do great things because she built up the energy on a daily basis, energizing herself, being prayerful. A lot of us, we say to ourselves, well, I don't know how to pray. I don't pray right. I need to do it the right way. There is no right way to pray. There are ways that are more effective than others, but there's really no wrong way to pray. Sometimes Jesus spit in people's eyes, and that was his prayer. That really happened. Or he'd spit in some dirt and put it on their eyes. He'd tell them to go show themselves to the priest, or don't show yourself or tell anybody about this. He would use words, he'd use visualization, he would do physical things. Your method of prayer is uniquely yours, but it's important that you exercise this prayer, and to be present with yourself, and to be flexible in your use of prayer. Affirmative prayer is a powerful method of prayer, and I put in your bulletins that affirmative prayer treatment that we use during the meditation time. You can use that treatment for just about anything. I discovered it 2 weeks ago. I was going through some files, and it was in my handwriting, and I vaguely remember coming up with it. And I do remember using the last 3 lines from Emma Curtis Hopkins, the great spiritual teacher. But the rest of it, I don't know how long ago I wrote it, but it seemed to help me last night when I was dealing with the world conditions and what's going on in Virginia. And I thought, what am I going to do? And it was like, no, I'm going to establish myself in a spiritual consciousness and move with that spiritual consciousness. But how do you move with this energy of prayer when you don't feel like you know how to pray? Paul wrote, even when you don't know how to pray, the Spirit will intercede for you in a way that's too deep for words. If you love God, God will work with everything and move it in a pattern for good. That's that light. Everything that light touches becomes that light. But it doesn't matter so much the methodology. It's the willingness to do the work. And it's the prayer that makes the difference. Back in 1979, when I was running the Youth of Unity, I shared that they cut back on my budget, and we had a conference. I worked half-time, and then I had a full-time assistant, and they decided, well, who needs to do that for the teenagers? It's not that important. So they cut it out completely. Well, there was no way that I could put on a conference with 450 people working half-time. I mean, how could I possibly do that? But my boss said, look, we can't do anything about it this year. I'll fix it for next year. And he got some temporary people and brought them in, so I got a little bit of help. But there was no way I could put on this conference. So what did I do? I took a half hour every day and went to the Peace Chapel at Unity Village. How many people have been to the Peace Chapel at Unity Village? Yeah, it's a powerful place. And I would do my prayer work, setting up the energy, setting up the consciousness and the vibration. And then, when I acted, I didn't have time to double check, triple check like you're supposed to. I just would get one pass at it. And do you know that conference went on with fewer mistakes and problems? It was the most blissfully orderly, easy conference I've ever seen, except for at the end, because I thought I would be, I got it into my head that they had a balloon release with helium balloons, and I thought, well, why do we get up that morning to fill up the helium balloons? We should do it the night before. And of course they all leaked, and so we had balloons on the floor, but we had a pretend balloon release, and it was still twice as much fun, actually. But the next year, they funded me, I got my assistant, and I knew I really didn't need God's help. That conference had so many problems because I was relying on myself. So take the energy every morning to set up the vibration and do the thing that you need to do. You know, I know it's blasphemy, but Jesus was the ultimate energizer bunny. You know, he energized himself. He went off to the mountain and off on a lake, and he went out in the desert, and he took the time to energize himself. And sometimes he took other people with him. Remember, he said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. And that 2 or 3, he didn't say 2 or more. What that really says is, it doesn't take a lot of help, but if you've got people in your life that you really feel you can align with, call on them for prayer. Call on our chaplains for prayer after the service. Be willing to get an intentional family. This is a wonderful environment here. At 10:20 every Sunday morning, we have a prayer circle here in the front of the sanctuary, and we just say the first names aloud of the people we're praying for. And that energy that comes through is palpable. It's powerful. And we can feel that energy flowing through us. And I hope that you'll avail yourself of that. But getting that support to energize yourself. Use your affirmations and energize yourself. Go into meditation if you're able to do that and energize yourself and build that energy. You know, Jesus built into himself and charged into himself that energy, and it was so powerful that one time he was so present that he didn't even know he was doing prayer treatment work. There was a woman, and this is a wonderful story, who touched him. You've heard this story before. The whole crowd tried to touch him with their hands, for healing power was coming out of him that cured them all. Who was it that touched me? Jesus asked. While everybody denied it, Peter said, Master, the crowds are pushing and pressing in on you. But Jesus said, somebody touched me. I knew that healing power had gone out from me. You know, that healing power went out from him. He could feel that energy. But he was vibrationally attuned, and he was fully present. He was able to move that energy, and that energy was able to move through him. You know, I have a mentor out on the West Coast, and I work with her. And when she was my age, 64 years old, she had a stroke and was paralyzed on one side. And everybody, including the doctor, said, you know, you're just going to have to be mature. You're just going to have to settle in, because people don't come back from this all the way. So you can do some physical therapy, but you just have to be used to this and realize you're going to be limited. And she said, I went through about 2 months of a battle within my being. Within that being, that part of me that was saying to myself, you got to be mature. You got to understand your limitations and just accept things as they are. And that other part of me that said, hell no. And I'm going to fight this thing, and I'm going to do something about it. And she said after 2 months, hell no won out. And she did the work. She got herself signed up to be in plays and got involved as a star of plays. Her first role, she had to do an Irish brogue, and she couldn't even speak weeks before. She had a hard time, even getting words. She could barely babble, but she got herself up to speed, and she went on for years. And today, she is a concert pianist. She can play with both hands, and she worked herself back because she exercised the will to energize herself in that prayful way. Well, there's playfulness, there's prayfulness, and there's forgiveness. And you know, if you're trying to bring the light in, sometimes you need to let go of that which is in the way of the light. Sometimes we hold on to attitudes that get in the way of that. One time I was feeling very self-righteous. A lot of situations in my life just didn't seem to be going the way I thought that they should be going, and people were not behaving themselves. And I got very self-righteous about it. It's easy to do when you watch the news, right? I mean, what is self-righteousness? So what's your definition? And we usually don't do this, but somebody tell me, what's your definition? What's self-righteousness?
I'm right and you're wrong.
I'm right and you're wrong. Now there are times that I might have a greater grasp of what reality is, but it's lifting myself up and not having compassion for another human being. Yeah, what other definitions of self-righteousness do you have? Yeah.
Like I would never get in that situation to begin with.
Okay, so I would never go do what you're doing, but the truth is that we're evolving souls, and we all have at some point. So I was in that self-righteous state, and Spirit moved through a situation me into a new consciousness and lifted me out of my self-righteousness, and the way it worked was like this. I was feeling, very upset about this, and I thought I would go, it was during a work day, to a park that I loved. I could be close to nature, I could hear the birds chirp, and I could smell the smell of nature, and it would lift me out of this attitude. Well, that's a good enough idea, but I got there to the park, and I started hearing this bellowing of this horrible radio program. I'm not going to say whose radio program it was, but it was my least favorite radio program. And I saw a guy over there, it was playing out of a van. And so as I rushed over to the van, I said to the guy, I said, "What are you doing?" And I noticed he was teeing up a golf ball. And he kept hitting the golf ball over towards the children's play area. Now this wasn't a golfing place. He was littering, he was endangering children, he was polluting the air, he was doing everything that I thought was wrong, and I was incensed. And he said, "What do you think I'm doing?" He put down another golf ball and he hit it. And I went, "Well, you can't do that, that's the children's play area." He says, "Watch me." And he put it down and he hit it again. And I said, "Well, I'm going to call the park rangers." He says, "You do that." And he sat down and hit another one. And I realized, this guy's got a weapon in his hands and he's half crazy. What am I doing? I'm nuts. So I called the park ranger, and the park ranger said, "There's nothing we can do about it." Oh man. So I was just doubly incensed, and then it hit me. Oh my gosh. There weren't any children in the children's area. Nobody was really in danger. I suppose there were a few golf balls lying around, but the whole thing was so I would let go of my self-righteousness. This spirit of self-righteousness was sucked out of me like a vacuum cleaner. And I ended up taking my walk laughing and having a great time. I never saw that. I figured that guy was a hologram. I figured that he had materialized there, and that I had, but I saw him again 3 months later. I stopped myself from going up and thanking him, but I thought to myself, "God bless you for your willingness to help me get out of my self-righteousness." So what about this forgiveness? This forgiveness is letting go of that which is preventing the light from flowing. There was a couple that I knew, and she was left with 3 children, and he was taking all the money that was supposed to go to the children and gallivanting around in Europe and in the Caribbean. And she called me into the hospital. Apparently her kidneys were failing. They said there was nothing they could do, and they couldn't find a cause. She was only about 50 years old. There was no disease, there was no reason for this to happen. But she'd studied unity for many years, and she knew what it was. She said, "It's that sorry so-and-so." And she said, "I got 3 kids who are depending on me, and I'm letting this guy jeopardize that. I've got to forgive him." Well, she didn't have any big tools or anything, but she did remember Jesus' words about forgiveness. And I love this. He said, I say to all of you who listen to me, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who harm you. And she used that as a shortcut. And she prayed for him. And she knew Edwin Gaines. And she remembered Edwin saying, "Even if you got to pray, I forgive you, you sorry so-and-so." She says she started with that. And she worked on it. And almost immediately, her kidneys started coming back. And she started getting better. Now, she still had tremendous financial problems, but I was involved with a group of people that did a fundraiser for her, and she got off her feet, and she got her life back. And when he died of a very debilitating disease a few years later, she was by his side, and she'd forgiven him. Not saying that you're going to do that with everybody that you forgive, but in that situation, she was ready. And she told me, she says, I worked at it, and the day came when I knew it happened. Now, if you want to have a tool for forgiveness, I've shared a couple weeks ago about the 7-step method. How many people got the CD for the 7 steps when we put it out there? Well, we have at least the handouts that are outside of Fellowship Hall. Pick it up, and if there's something you're working on, just answer the questions and just do this work. Get that energy out. But it's so powerful to do this kind of work. Eric Butterworth once said, you know, people tell me, oh, I have the right to resent this person. He says, well, you may have the right to resent this person, but you also have the right to be sick and miserable. And that's what's going to happen. And he mentioned the Buddha, who said, if you are holding a hot coal and you want to throw it at another person, you're the one who's going to get burned. So you've got to let the energy go. And so when we're dealing with the world situation, I know there's a lot of tough people doing a lot of things out there, but we've got to be willing to lift up everyone into the light and to pray, as Jesus said, for those who seem to do us harm. I had a couple of friends of mine. One was a daughter, one was a mother, and it was a very unfortunate situation. The mother had divorced her father, and her father was a tough character and had treated her badly in her childhood, but she'd come to peace with it. They had a decent relationship, but her mother was taking the father to court and wanted the daughter to testify on her behalf, and the daughter said, it would ruin my relationship with my dad, even though you have the facts on your side. I can't do it because I know I'd lose that. And the mother did not handle it well. She cut her off completely and wouldn't speak to her for 3 years. The day came when her brother had a wedding, and it was about 1,200 miles away, and she had to drive there. She was dreading seeing her mother again because her mother wouldn't speak to her or answer any of her phone calls. On the way there, she thought, what do I do? She didn't have these 7-step tools or anything, but she said, you know, Jesus said you got to forgive 70 times 7. His disciples went to him and said, how many times we got to forgive? Is it like the rabbis, 7 times? They tell us 7 times? And he said, no, 70 times 7, which was numerologically infinity. So she said, what if I take that literally? What if I just say, I forgive you, Mom? 70 times 7, that's what? 490 times? Am I right about that? Yeah. And so she just went in the car and she counted on her fingers while she was driving. I forgive you, Mom. I forgive you, Mom. I forgive you, Mom. She said somewhere in the 200s, she heard a popping sound. She felt an energy burst in the car. She was by herself. And she just cried. She bawled. Thankfully, it was on the straightaway for the next 100 miles. And she said when she showed up, her mother came up and greeted her. They've been friends ever since. Now, that doesn't always happen when you do forgiveness work, but her mother was ready to let go of it. But, you know, doing the forgiveness work, taking the steps, forgiveness has got 2 steps to it. The first is setting an intention, and the second is the process that follows it up. The first is your will to forgive, and the second is your willingness to work through it. And as Jane Hart says, forgiveness is like an onion. There are many layers, and you cry. So you may have to work through many layers of it, but it's a powerful thing to do. It's a healing thing to do. So these are really the 3 steps. You got to be playful, you got to be prayerful, and you got to forgive. And when you do that, whether you're dealing with the situations in the news or whether you're dealing with the situation in your life, you will create a light-filled response. It will reveal the light and turn every situation into light. I'm going to take that prayer treatment that we did and just see if we can work with it again silently. And I'm going to just ask you to go back into whatever that situation was that you had in mind, or perhaps it's the world affairs that have been on the news lately. But I'm just going to ask you to say this aloud with me. So take it out of your bulletins. I just get the feeling we need to really punch this through. So we just take whatever it is we have in mind. I'm taking the circumstances in Virginia. But whatever it is that you want to work on, and we take these as our words of truth together. I now claim my good out of this. I now expect my blessing from this. There are no false actions in God. God is the source of all my good. I am lifted up out of my old consciousness. I am being pulled into my new sense of being. I am being lifted into my new mind. My mind is not going to limit God. This too is God. This too is good. And I demand to see the blessing in it. And so it is. Amen. This is such a restful time. Such a peaceful time. And so we take all our little papers in our hands and we set them aside. open our hands. If you'd like, you can open your hands face up in your lap. And setting aside all thoughts, we move deeply into this presence, releasing and setting aside all our feelings. And we know that everything that the light touches becomes that light. We move with the light of God. We begin by taking a nice deep breath and letting it out. And imagining ourselves just as we are, sitting where we are, glowing with light. We envision divine light in every cell, radiant light all around us. I am a being of light. In me, the light. Thank you, God. The light that is flowing through me now. Flowing. Flowing. It lifts me up. This light sets me free. And I feel myself being lifted up. Up. Becoming more light-filled, more spacious and open. My heart is open. In me, the light. And on behalf of all humanity, as I pray these words, just know you're saying for all of us. You may focus on whatever need you have or whatever is concerning you in the world. Just listen. Take it into your heart. I now claim my good out of this. I now expect my blessing from this. There are no false actions in God. God is the source of all my good. I am lifted up out of my old consciousness. I am being pulled into my new sense of being. I am being lifted into my new mind. My mind is not going to limit God. This too is God. This too is good. I demand to see the blessing in it. As we move deeper into this presence, we know that we're being pulled into a new sense of well-being. In me, the light. And as I see the light in myself, that light touches everything that has been a concern to me. And all becomes that light. And I rest in that light. My mind wanders, I bring it back. In me, the light. Being of light. I was created in the image and likeness of God. A creative power says in me, through me, and as me, let there be light. willingly, playfully and prayfully participate in this life. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And so it is. Okay, Charles Fillmore quote to you. It's so powerful and it'll set you up for your offering. Think of yourself as spirit working with powerful spiritual forces, and know that the demands of spirit must and will be met. Give in a spirit of love and put the real substance of your heart into your gift. You can bless and spiritually multiply everything you give by the power of your word. In this way, you're setting into motion mental and spiritual forces that will bring large results into visibility. So, powerful stuff. So, I give prayfully and playfully, and I receive abundantly. Together?
I give prayfully and playfully, and I receive abundantly.
And silently. And again, aloud together. I give prayfully and playfully, and I receive abundantly, and so it is. Amen.